Hi, I'm Heather Sanford with the Daughters of the American Revolution. And I don't know about you, but when I think of the holiday season, I think of the time period between November and January, which was called Yuletide. It was the season of good cheer and thankfulness, the season of Judah the Hammer, cross-dressing, folk dancing, mischief making, and dragging whole trees into your house and setting them on fire. Or at least, that's how you would have experienced Yuletide in colonial America. The first Yuletide holiday, Thanksgiving, was sometimes celebrated in the Northeast, but not on a set day. The first Thanksgiving in the colonies was hosted by the Plymouth colonists to thank the Native American Wampanoag tribe for helping the colonists survive. It was a 3-day feast held in November of 1621, but Thanksgiving wouldn't become an official holiday for another 242 years. It took Sarah Josepha Hale, a widow with 5 children, to get Thanksgiving declared a national holiday. In the early 1800s, Mrs. Hale published a book of children's poetry, her most famous being Mary Had a Little Lamb. She was also an editor of a magazine called Godey's Lady's Book, which made her one of the most influential voices of the 1800s. In 1846, Mrs. Hale began writing to the president and other politicians, asking them to support the creation of Thanksgiving as a national holiday. After publishing magazine editorials and writing hundreds of letters over the course of 6 different presidencies, she was finally successful in 1863 when President Lincoln declared the last Thursday in November to be Thanksgiving. This led to Mrs. Hale becoming known as the Mother of Thanksgiving. The next holiday on the calendar would be Hanukkah, which falls between late November and late December, depending on the Hebrew calendar. Hanukkah is a minor holiday in the Jewish religion, but it shares a similarity with the American Revolution in that it's about rising up against oppression. Hanukkah celebrates the Maccabean Jews revolting against the reign of the Seleucid Empire in 165 BC. King Antiochus IV outlawed Judaism and ordered everyone to worship Greek gods. The king was having pigs sacrificed in the temple on an altar that he erected to Zeus. Judah Maccabee, known as Judah the Hammer, and his followers drove the Syrians out of Jerusalem, purified the temple, and rebuilt the altar. However, when the victors went to light the lamp called the Eternal Light, they found only 1 jar of ritualistic oil, just enough to stay lit for 1 day. But against all odds, the flames burned for 8 nights, leading to an annual 8-day festival. By the 18th century, candles were being used instead of oil lamps in Eastern Europe because they were cleaner and less expensive than getting olive oil in winter. This tradition would have emigrated to the colonies. During colonial times, there was a small Jewish population living in New York, Newport, Philadelphia, Charleston, and Savannah. The first American synagogue was Shireth Israel, completed in 1730 in New York. There were about 100 Jewish soldiers during the Revolutionary War, the majority of them fighting as patriots. It is said that George Washington saw his first menorah at the winter encampment at Valley Forge, and he asked the private who owned it about his unusual candlestick. And while it would seem as if Hanukkah traditions really haven't changed in thousands of years, that is not the case with Christmas traditions. There was a time when Christmas was so controversial it wasn't even celebrated by Christians. In order to understand why, we need to know the origin of Christmas. The Puritans considered Christmas a pagan holiday because Christmas celebrates the birth of Christ, and birthday celebrations were a pagan custom. Christians felt that saints and martyrs should be honored on their feast day, not the day they were born. The Puritans also felt Christmas had no biblical basis, and they were horrified by the rowdy way the holiday was celebrated, which brings us to how Christmas was celebrated. Before the 1800s, Christmas was a boisterous, adult-oriented holiday. It was a time for sports, carol singing, mixed-gender dancing, gambling, promiscuity, and excessive drinking. Each year, rich landowners in England would open their doors to the poor and give them food and drink as an act of charity. The poorest man would be named the Lord of Misrule, and he would switch places with a landowner who would wait upon him at banquets that frequently descended into bawdy drunkenness. This custom was brought to the colonies and became the basis for something called mumming, where costume people would barge into your home and wouldn't leave until you gave them food, drink, or money. Picture Halloween, colonial style. This rowdiness and excess had nothing to do with the Bible, so the Puritans tried to completely outlaw all seasonal plays, dancing, games, carol singing, and merriment of any kind. They even outlawed traditional holiday foods, such as mince pies and puddings. In fact, in Massachusetts, from 1659 to 1681, the Puritans passed a law of a 5-shilling fine, about $50 in modern times, to anyone observing the holiday, but they were not successful in keeping people from celebrating. One tradition of Christmas that we may recognize is going door to door singing Christmas carols. "We Wish You a Merry Christmas" is an English carol from the 1500s that demands, "Give us some figgy pudding." This is not a veiled threat. The carol specifically states, "We won't go until we get some." If the homeowner didn't provide treats, the carolers would retaliate by throwing rocks at the house or creating some other kind of mischief or destruction. Again, this is kind of like Halloween. We will play a trick on you if you don't give us a treat. Let's talk about the 12 days of Christmas. I mentioned mumming or mummering earlier. Mumming is derived from the Greek momus, the personification of satire and mockery in Aesop's fables. This was a way that the lower class members of society would blow off steam. They carried out frolics, which mixed merriment and mayhem. The public drinking, dancing, and street foolery were an open mockery of established authority and social controls. Mummers would blacken their faces with coal, or make them red with ochre, to disguise their identities. They would then dress up in costumes, sometimes as animals, sometimes in clothing of the opposite sex, to perform skits in the streets and from door to door. A popular skit was to reenact the story of the patron saint of England, St. George. St. George slayed the people-eating dragon and saved the princess and the villagers. Much like carolers, mummers would receive treats or payment in exchange for their performances. These raucous street performances evolved into the modern-day Mummers Parade, which is held in Philadelphia on January 1st. Colonists also kept the English tradition of wassailing, toasting their friends and family by drinking an alcoholic hot spiced cider. The drink varied by local ingredients, but it was offered to visitors throughout Christmastide. In some cases, a large wooden bowl, decorated with evergreen leaves and red ribbons, was taken around the community to wish good health to all who partook of it. Those with apple orchards would process to the orchard with the wassail bowl, and sprinkle the trees with the beverage using pieces of toast. Onlookers would sing wassail songs to encourage the trees to bear fruit in the coming year. How do we know when Christmas traditions began to change? By looking at almanacs of the time. Holidays were printed in red ink, leading to the phrase "a red-letter day," or day of special significance. Before 1730, almanacs did not name Christmas. After 1760, it was rare not to name Christmas. Sometime in the late 1730s, Christmas became more temperate, calling for mirth and moderation. Christmas boxes, or tips for those in your employ, were given as a token of appreciation. This merged into the practice of giving gifts to your dependents and eventually to all family members. These gifts would have been very special. Christmas presents were opened on New Year's Day. A popular present was a pomander, an orange studded with whole cloves, dusted with cinnamon, and tied with ribbon. Christmas celebrations originated in the southern colonies because they did not enforce the Puritans' laws against Christmas. Traditions included parties, hunts, decorating with evergreen branches and fruit, and church services. Feasts included beef, chicken, ham, sweet potato pudding, stuffed cabbage, root cellar vegetables, sugared nuts, and chocolate. Christmas as we know it didn't really start until the 1800s. It got a facelift with the 1823 poem A Visit from St. Nicholas by Clement Clarke Moore, but New England didn't really embrace Christmas until after the Civil War. Children even attended school on Christmas Day well until the 1800s. Christmas wasn't declared a federal holiday until 1870. How you celebrated Christmas depended on your country of origin. Christmas trees were only in the German regions of Pennsylvania. The Yule log was a Norse tradition which had pagan beginnings. Yuletide was the period from the end of November through the middle of January, and many Yule customs were absorbed into Christmas celebrations as Christianity overtook Northern Europe. When Pope Julius I set the Christmas feast day to December 25th, Christians began cutting down a large tree that they would light in their hearth to welcome friends and family and light the way for the baby Jesus. This tradition made its way to the colonies. An entire tree was brought into the house, and one end was placed in the fire. The tree trunk was pushed into the hearth as it burned. At the end of Twelfth Night, the unburned part of the tree was extinguished and saved to light next year's Yule log. As hearths became smaller, so did the Yule log, and now somehow it has become a rolled chocolate cake. Boxing Day is celebrated on December 26th, the feast of St. Stephen, and is a custom from the UK that was celebrated in the colonies until the American Revolution. Servants were required to work for their employers on Christmas Day, so they would be given the day off on December 26th to visit with their own families. Their employers would give them gift boxes, monetary tips, and possibly leftover food to take with them. Boxing Day was also a time to donate money for the poor in the church's alms boxes. The most important holiday on the calendar was actually New Year's Day. In the colonies, New Year's Day was celebrated on March 25th until 1753, when the British decided to adopt the Gregorian calendar. You see, by the 16th century, it had become obvious that the Julian calendar was not correct. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII approved a new style calendar known as the Gregorian calendar. 10 days were dropped from October of 1582. Only years divisible by 400 would have a leap day, and New Year's Day was moved to January 1st. Now, Queen Elizabeth I of England was a Protestant, and she was not about to take orders from the Pope. Therefore, England and its colonies did not change to the Gregorian calendar until 1752, when they dropped 11 days from the month of September. The calendar changed from Wednesday, September 2nd to Thursday, September 14th overnight. For anyone doing genealogy, you may have noticed the double dates in colonial record keeping. Dates between January 1st and March 25th were identified with a slash mark to show the years that overlapped in the old style, new style. Twelfth Night was the last night of Christmastide. It was the night before Epiphany, the day the wise men, or three kings, arrived at the stable to see the baby Jesus and present him with their gifts. In the colonies, it was traditional to host a party or a ball on Twelfth Night. The food served was decoratively arranged as works of art. Farmers worked most of the year, so winter was a chance to visit with family, and a lot of weddings and important family events happened then. In fact, George and Martha Washington were married on Twelfth Night in 1759. The last holiday I'm going to mention is Plough Monday. Molly dancers were much like mummers in that they went visiting from house to house collecting money or refreshments in exchange for their entertainment. Molly was English slang for a cross-dresser or drag queen. Molly dancers were often dock workers or farmers who would dress in women's clothing and disguise their faces. They would go out on the first Monday in January, which was called Plough Monday. They would bring a plow with them, and if you did not reward them for their performance, they might plow up your garden. To end my presentation, I thought it might be nice to give you a little taste of Morris or Molly dancing. Please enjoy this video of Gog Magog Molly from Cambridgeshire, England. Thank you for watching.